acknowledgement. The City of Albany recognizes that we occupy the land originally protected by the Confederated Villages of Lishan. We acknowledge the genocide that took place on these lands and must make strides to repay the moral debt that is owed to these indigenous people, specifically the Ohlone tribe. We thank them for their contributions, which have transformed our community and will continue to bring forth growth and unity. The City of Albany commits to sustaining ongoing relationships with the tribe and together build a better future for all that now make this their home. We can move on to the approval of minutes.
Any questions or comments on the November 15th minutes? Feel free to make a motion.
I'll move that the minutes be approved.
Second.
Member Hodges? Yes. Member Larson?
Yes.
Member Lieberman?
Yes.
Member Melgen?
Yes.
Member Vahil McClanahan?
Yes.
Chair Mohammed?
Yes. We can move on to public comment for any members wanting to speak in item not on the agenda.
We have one hand raised online. Go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, good evening, CAC members, and this is Nick Peterson with the Albany Climate Action Coalition. I just wanted to point out that at this last City Council meeting, they got an update status on the strategic plan. And goal number 1 of the strategic plan is to address climate change pretty much. There were members of ACAC there that called on the City Council and the City Manager to establish clear directions and leadership throughout all city departments to implement climate action measures in all activities, including purchases and contracts with third-party entities. I think it's really important that staffing needs to be adequate and empowered to ensure that coordination of efforts and actions are accomplished in an efficient and rapid manner. Sort of a business as usual approach must be challenged and stovepipe organizational habits revised so that actions per the City Climate Action and Adaptation Plan are implemented on schedule and effectively. ACAC looks forward to providing beneficial input and support to city actions that aggressively address climate change. And I really look forward to the coming year. You guys, I think things are ramping up. A lot of good things have really started, so we're excited about moving forward and providing new policy and recommendations to the City Council through this committee. Thank you very much.
No more online hands raised.
Thank you. We can now go on to the next item, which is announcements.
I just have a few small announcements for today. The first one is on the status update to the committee status update for the City Council that we discussed last month. I just wanted to let you know that I made a small edit on that. After the fact, the clerk requested that we include a list of the subcommittees on the for each committee, so I included that list, but no substantive changes. So just wanted to let you know that in case you were caught off guard when it's presented to the council next month. And then just 2 other small announcements as we wrap up the year. I just wanted to note that the compost hub will be closed the last 2 Sundays of the year as the farm has a winter break, and also the City Hall offices will be closed all of next week.
Any questions?
The compost starts back up in January.
Yes.
If there are no questions, we can move on to public comment.
See no hands raised.
Right. we just move on to the next item, or, okay.
Unless anyone has any comments on the announcements. But
We can move on to the next item, which is presentation.
So the first presentation will be mine tonight. So for this presentation, I really just wanted to spend a little bit of time kind of giving an overview, sort of a distant look at electrification as a whole and how we're doing on our goals and what the future looks like. Not directly for like a specific policy that we're looking at or anything, but just to kind of give some more context as we have these discussions throughout next year. So that's the intent of this presentation. And I wanted to just start off with the CAP goals themselves. So in our Climate Action and Adaptation Plan, which was passed in 2019, we set several goals for 2045. The first is that 98% of existing residential buildings will be electrified, and 95% of existing commercial buildings, and also that all new buildings built at that point will be electric. And the purpose behind those goals, as we've talked about on this committee many times, is to reduce our emissions, because natural gas from buildings is one of the largest sector of our emissions in the city. That's the bluish purple sections of that pie chart you see on the right. So it makes up a pretty significant share of our city emissions, and so that's why the goals are to pretty much fully electrify our city's buildings by 2045. Obviously a big task. But we have been working on it and are making some pretty significant strides. This is a chart that you might recognize from last month when we were talking about heat pump rebates. So this shows in the orange there for HVACs and the blue for water heaters, the percent of our permits that are heat pumps rather than gas furnaces or gas water heaters. And this is broken up by 6-month segments starting in 2020 and going through to the end of this year. So as you can see, we've seen some pretty significant rise, especially in HVACs, reaching almost 70% of permits in the last few months. So some pretty impressive strides, as we spoke about last month. And I also just wanted to highlight some of the kind of bigger scale work that's been going on for the past few years to make this happen. There's lots of incentive programs. We have our own that we talked about recently. There's also BayREN, which has a wide variety of rebates for electrification and energy efficiency. There are IRS, federal tax credits that launched at the beginning of this year. There's also the TECH program, which offers rebates for both heat pump HVACs and heat pump water heaters. And there's also a slew of smaller rebates that are kind of more specific to various things. But these make up some pretty significant incentives together. And we've also been working on education and outreach very significantly for the past few years. These two are just examples of that. We have our home electrification guide, which is a very thorough website specific to Albany with lots of information about what it means to electrify, how much it costs, how to do it, what the incentive structures look like. And then we also have our induction cooktop lending program to give people a chance to actually, try induction cooking and see what electrification looks like in their home firsthand. So we've been doing a lot for the last few years, which is part of the reason we've seen those pretty impressive increases in electrification or adoption of electric appliances, as well as wider shifts in the market. But there are also two really significant changes coming in the next couple of years. So we spoke about this a bit last time. The HERA rebates are expected to launch probably sometime in the middle of next year. These are federal rebates, although the program will be run by the state. And as you can see on this list here, the amounts that it's going to offer for electrification is very significant. in particular up to $8,000 for heat pump HVAC systems. And that amount of money can actually close the incremental cost gap between a furnace and a heat pump. And that's pretty much true for all the other things on this list as well. These are really designed to make the cost about even, or in some cases even less expensive for electric appliances. So we're expecting that's going to make a big impact. And then the other thing that's going to be really, really significant is a new regulation from the Bay Area Air Quality Management District, or BACMD, as you see it there. This ruling is going to make it so that only electric HVACs and water heaters can be sold or installed within our air district. So it's basically requiring that the appliances have to have 0 NOx. That's an air pollutant, and there aren't any gas appliances on the market that have that 0 NOx. It's kind of impossible. I mean, maybe not technically, but there's nothing available. So it's really an all-electric requirement when it comes down to it. So that'll go into effect in 2027 for water heaters, 2029 for HVACs, and then 2031 for large commercial water heaters. And as you can see on the right there, that's a map of the air district. So it's a pretty large area. There is, of course, a possibility that we'll see people bringing in gas furnaces and water heaters from outside of the air district. You know, I'm sure we'll see some of that, although it's technically not allowed. But I'll also note that there is a statewide version of this rule that's probably going to launch in 2030. And so at that point, you'd have to be coming in from Nevada or something, and it starts making the price a lot higher. And so we're expecting that this is really going to make it so that almost 100% of our water heaters and HVACs are electric around that time period. So all of that said, I went ahead and put together a forecast of electrification for heat pumps and water heaters in the city. Please take this with a few grains of salt, since it is, it's just a model. But it's really meant to give us a sense of, what does this look like over time? How close are we to reaching our 2045 goal, just based on where we are now and those 2 new programs going into effect in the next few years. And what I've done is I've put together a faster pace and slower pace scenario just to give a sense of the sort of range of outcomes. So you can see here the green is faster and the orange is slower. They're mainly differentiated by the assumed turnover rate, how quickly the furnaces and water heaters will break and need to be replaced, as well as some different assumptions about how quickly we might see electrification take hold. But yeah, it's meant to give us a sense of what this looks like. And as you can see, especially with water heaters, we're expecting to be able to meet our 2045 cap goal fairly easily. Even in the slower pace scenario, we're getting there a few years or early. With the HVACs, not quite as much. This fast-paced scenario gets us to 100% by just about 2045. The slower pace scenario doesn't quite get there because it's assuming that the HVACs are lasting longer, and so we're gonna see some that are making it past 2045. So there's a little bit of a gap there, but still in relatively good shape considering that it's just as things stand right now. So that brings us to the work to be done. The first thing in this column is preparation for the air district regulation. How do we get our city ready for this big change in what's allowed for not having gas furnaces and water heaters on the market anymore? Of course, we need to continue with incentives and education, kind of keep up the work that we've been doing in that sphere, and also preparing specifically for the regulation itself, letting people know what it is, how it works, when it's coming, all of those details. We also definitely want to work more with commercial buildings, which haven't really been a focus so far and are definitely falling behind some. And there's some complications with the commercial-sized water heaters and all of that, so we definitely want to look into that some. And then for single-family homes, single-family homes are on a fairly good trajectory right now, but one major area of weakness is electrification planning. Oftentimes, it's much easier to electrify a home if you're thinking of the home holistically, rather than just doing one appliance at a time as soon as it dies. And so trying to help people plan for full electrification of their home can really help them prepare for that situation where the electric version is the only option. So those are a few things we can do to help prepare. And then a really big section of preparing for this new regulation is multifamily buildings. It's sort of a realm of its own in some ways. And I think there's a lot of reasons to put an emphasis on multifamily buildings. The first one is that they are far behind single family in terms of adoption rates of electrification. In the chart that I showed you a while ago with the percent of permits that are heat pumps, almost all of that growth comes from single family homes. Multifamily are not very well represented there at all. We're not seeing a ton of permits coming in for multifamily buildings in general, and when we do, they're usually furnaces, usually gas water heaters. So that's one thing. Also, there are a lot more barriers to electrification when it comes to multifamily buildings. Usually they are not being worked on as regularly, so they might be several code cycles behind. They might have more issues with the electrical system. They also have some issues with split incentives. So, you can imagine as a building owner, you would be investing a lot of money and you're not necessarily getting as much reward as the tenant. Of course, it is making your building worth more, but on that day-to-day level, it's not the air you're breathing, it's not your comfort in the wintertime, it's not your utility bill. So that can create an issue. And then there's also the fact that these buildings are large and upgrading them takes a lot of money, a lot of capital. And most of the building owners in Albany are, they own one or two buildings. It's a big investment for them. It's maybe their retirement plan. They don't necessarily have a lot of liquid capital sitting around to fully electrify a large apartment building. So a lot of barriers here. Lots of reasons that they're falling behind. And then there's also opportunity when it comes to multifamily buildings as well. So one major thing is increased equity benefits of focusing on multifamily. We know that many of the people in our city who are lower income or disadvantaged in some way are living in multifamily buildings rather than single family. So, focusing there can help us focus on the community members that need the city's attention most. And also, as someone who lives in a multifamily building, you have less control over your own circumstances. You can't electrify on your own. So there's some equity benefits there as well. And then also there's potential for efficiency and economies of scale. So as an example, multifamily makes up 6% of the buildings in the city, but 37% of the units. So with a smaller number of projects, you can reach a larger number of people, you can reduce a larger amount of CO2 emissions, right? There are lots of buildings that are a pretty similar design, so theoretically you could create a program where you're able to do a similar project multiple times, and again, you're working with a smaller number of building owners. So there's just possibilities there for being able to get more done with less time and less funding, possibly. So that's a whole area of work to be done. And then there's also work to be done in the kind of longer term, not necessarily that we would have to start farther from now, but we could, just kind of looking at the larger scheme of this. And that mainly has to do with this gap that I mentioned in the HVAC electrification rate. So this is the same chart we saw earlier, and as you can see, there's this space between about 100% and, 60%, where depending on how things shake out, we might not get to that goal with heat pump HVACs. And so, there's work to be done there to make up that gap. There's lots of ways that could be done. We could think about future policies that basically increase that turnover rate and make it so there's more furnaces being replaced in that period of time. You could imagine, for instance, a time of sale requirement where you're turning over furnaces at that point of sale rather than when they naturally die, or at a point of retrofit, or even at a specific deadline that we set. There's lots of different types of ways to do that. You could do it through requirements or incentives. And then there's also the possibility of that kind of work being done on a regional or state level as well. For instance, we have the Air District ruling that is doing a lot for our electrification goals, and it's being done on this larger regional level. So I think we do need to keep in mind that it's possible that we could see this kind of work being done on a bigger scale, and that it's something we might not need to create a policy for that's city-specific, but rather just support it as a city. So there are ways that you could imagine we wait a few years, see if there's a policy that happens on a larger scale, and then depending on what that looks like, choose what the city policy could be to make up for this gap and see how it shifts over time. So, it's a long-term conversation, but those are the kinds of policies you might look at to close that gap between the orange and the green lines there. So I know that was a lot of information. I'll also note that none of this was covering cooktops or dryers, which we know are also important for electrification. There's also electrical panels. There's a lot of components to all of this. But I wanted to kind of focus on the two big appliances that are kind of most costly and complex. So it's a complex, very meaty discussion, but just kind of getting the 3,000-foot view here. But of course, happy to answer any questions or dig into the details as you guys would like to, and I'll stop there.
Question back on the slide about the percentage of permits of water heaters and HVAC. It looked like the HVAC was a higher percentage, which surprised me. Is that a percentage of those types of permits, those lines, or is this a percentage of all permits?
Yeah, so it's a percentage of the type of permit. So for the HVAC line, it's a percentage of HVAC-specific permits, and for water heaters, it's for water heater-specific permits. Was I surprised? Not really. I think water heaters are much easier to replace, and a lot of people do that without getting a permit. It's really quick and cheap, and it's easier to not even know that heat pump water heaters exist, I think. Even though the actual cost and the incremental cost is lower, it's just such a small project for so many people. I think that's part of it. And also, we have our heat pump HVAC program, so I think that's made some impact on the HVAC side and maybe hasn't helped as much with the water heaters. I will say that in the last month and a half specifically, we've seen the water heater number rise a lot because the tech program just launched a new, very large incentive for water heaters. Okay. So we are seeing more growth there right now.
Following up on incentives, I'm wondering if we know how long those incentives will be available. I was just thinking about how soon the mandate is coming to electrify, and if we know if the incentives will be available at that time and beyond.
So, yeah, the answer changes depending on which incentives we're talking about. I know for the federal ones, they last, I think it's until 2030. I believe both for the tax credits and the HERA program, although I'm not 100% sure. And then, tech is until it runs out, and then it usually will get refunded. So that one's a little bit more up and down. And BayREN has consistent funding, but it does periodically change its funding structure. So that kind of depends.
On the subject of the incentives, what do you know about incentives for commercial buildings and multifamily dwellings?
Yeah, so there are incentives, although not quite as many, for commercial and multifamily buildings. Bayron has a commercial program that's not quite as extensive, but it does exist. That's definitely an area with some gaps. Multifamily, there is a pretty extensive Bayron program specifically for multifamily buildings that offers a fair amount of incentives. It hasn't been as well utilized as we might hope. I think there is still enough of a gap just because the total cost is so high. But it does exist, and tech also has a multifamily incentive program, but there's not, I think, enough funding for it. Like, the amounts are pretty good, but it can't serve that many buildings based on how much it's been funded.
Is it your sense, in terms of like percentage of cost covered, that that's the main disincentive for building owners, that they're aware that there's incentives, but it's just not really adequate?
I don't think many building owners are aware of the incentives. I think that's also another big gap. And then for the ones that are, it's a question of like, okay, they're covering maybe a decent percent of the cost, but the total number is still really big. So. Any other questions?
All right. If there are no other questions, we can move on to public comment.
We have 3 hands currently raised. Go
Hi,
ahead,
my name is
Catherine.
Catherine. Thank you so much for the presentation, super informative. And I want to applaud Michelle, you, and the rest of the CAC team for helping move this important information forward. I intend to use the heat pump rebates on my own property that I own in Albany. So thank you so much for those rebates. It's really great. I want to also thank you for the national lending program. That's great as well. That's not coming up next, but wanted to encourage and request the city to join dozens of other cities to declare a climate emergency, to bring more urgency and collaboration between city departments and climate action goals. So also want to say thank you for the ordinance on the foodware to recently essentially ban the single-use plastic items, and want to move on this quickly to ban plastic items for single use. We need to have more compostable foodware. It's available out there. It's an important thing to have to continue to reduce plastic use, and want to move on this quickly, not overanalyze it. So thanks again for all your hard work here. I'm excited about all this progress, and please keep it going. That's all. Thank you.
Next up, go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, hi, Nick Peterson, Albany Climate Action Coalition. This is all really great work, and I really think, Michelle is such a treasure for Albany to putting together all these figures. But one thing I kind of worry about is, we know the recent science that has come out on climate change, and which came out well after Albany established its current climate action adaptation plan. We're shooting for 2045. Unfortunately, it's kind of behind the curve now. And, seeing stats that Albany is going to 98-95% of electrification of buildings by 2045, and that some things might not make it, depending on, just in my mind, highlights even more that we need to be more aggressive and we need to push harder and swing things over. So how do you do that? Well, I really liked when you mentioned more requirement-based, maybe getting a little bit more stick going here, but bringing it in gradually. And this idea of a point of sale, which eventually will roll over to not whether you sell or not, the house is evaluated, and if certain emissions are happening, there's some kind of warning, and then that later goes into a fine that accumulates into an account that pays for conversions. So there's all sorts of interesting things we can do, but we need to do it now. We can't wait a few years down the line, see what the state does, see what the other things do. I think as an innovative community, we can start putting these things in place now, so we can do at least pilot projects where we make a really strong attempt to demonstrate how certain incentives are going to work better. And certainly this idea, I've been having some discussions with other Albany Climate Action Coalition folks, and this idea of having a bit more hand-holding. I know it's great to have the websites to be, put these policies in place and the heat pump thing, but I keep hearing that comment, they don't know about it. And I think we need to do a lot more direct action, community door-to-door work, maybe partnering with the high school kids and high school groups, certainly partnering with Albany Climate Action Coalition, to target maybe specific neighborhoods. And I'll speak on this further if it comes up, is, we have this great study that's going to look at pruning the gas piping, and that could lead into sort of a mini eco-block study where we could look at all these issues at once in conjunction with the efforts that are ongoing, so we don't come back again to the same place and say, oh, by the way, now we're looking at doing other things, or looking at EV charging or whatever. So anyway, I really like the efforts that are going along.
Go ahead, Lucinda.
Hi, this is Lucinda Young. Michelle, I want to thank you so much for the excellent presentation. I see some very encouraging numbers and what's happened with the increase in heat pump installations over the past year. However, the cap goal of, I believe it was 98% building carbon-free in approximately 20 years, I think it's going to be a really tall order, and I am concerned, even with, some positive news in this report, that it's going to be feasible for us to reach that. I would support the committee looking at some more incentives or mandates to install heat pumps at point of sale to address this concern. I also I think there needs to be more public awareness, and I believe Michelle had said that the city has done some public electrification workshops, and I haven't heard about those. Maybe I missed it, but I do try to stay pretty tuned in. I think there is a need for more public education and outreach about this. And other comment, given that the heat pump rebates have not been, or the heat pumps have not been widely installed in the commercial buildings, and where that's really the biggest bang for the buck. And also I know that the federal tax credits are not available for these properties to landlords. So I'm just thinking that perhaps it would be good to focus and have some increased City of Albany rebates, specifically made available to multifamily dwellings, just to kind of, since that seems to be a gap here. But excellent presentation, and thank you so much.
Go ahead, David.
Good evening. This is David Wimmer, and once again, I'd like to thank you for the excellent presentation. But when those first charts came up, and I saw the 2045, it just shocked me. I know I've known this and such. But I think since I've in my mind for doing things, trying to get us electrified and such. I'm personally thinking, God, we gotta get this done by 2030, and I see the 2045 and I realize, well, nobody's on board with where I'm at. I'm kind of like panic mode, and so that I would like to see the committee, or the city pass an emergency resolution, and advertise that. Get some mailers out, get some more public outreach going, so I think we should update our plan and move that date back to at least 2035. Oh, I just lost my train of thought. But I would also, we've talked about some other ways to move the calendar up and get some action done, and some ideas of how that might be be done, point of sale, et cetera, et cetera. I would encourage or ask that the committee take that on as a study, and specifically bring some of those ideas, research those ideas, and put those into a presentation or a report, so that we can actually start to formulate some actions and put those into action and move us forward in quick-like fashion. So I think that's it for me. I just want to see more action, faster, quicker, I'm just kind of it just makes me feel like the 2045 is just way too slow for where we need to be. Thank you.
No more hands raised.
Discussion of this item? Do you guys have any comments or anything?
Has there been any discussion outside of this committee about those sort of point of sale mandates? Like, I suspect that maybe previous iterations of the subcommittee have discussed that sort of thing. It seems like a lot, but maybe if you put the mandate out far enough in years, let's say I'm just sort of thinking about what was suggested in those comments about having a point of sale mandate, which would say when you sell a house, it has to have these upgrades. But if you made it publicly known that in 2035, that at that point, every home is going to have these technologies installed, then people who are thinking about selling their homes would see the advantage of installing, if the time came when their water heater gave out, if the time came when, well, I guess if that happens, it's already going to be mandated, because that technology will be mandated at that point.
Yeah, so for water heaters in 27 and HVACs in 29.
Okay, then my point
it'll
is kind of moot.
at that point of
Okay.
replacement.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, so I guess if you had a point of sale for 2035, maybe it would make some people react sooner than those, but
probably not though, because if they're going to do it, they're going to have to do it electrically anyway. Got it. But the mandate pushes on people who wouldn't be replacing it for any other reason. If it fails, you're going to have it replaced. If it hasn't failed, then point of sale would require it. Okay, all right. Sorry to talk myself through that.
Yeah, I can't answer your question from the beginning about other.
Yeah, about if it's been discussed.
iterations, if
Yeah, I
you'd
just
like.
didn't know if it's been.
So I know that before my time, staff did some investigation of what would be like a point of sale, not a requirement to necessarily change anything, but to do like an energy analysis similar to the program in Berkeley. So there was an analysis of that, and basically they concluded that requiring like an audit of the home wouldn't make a lot of changes in terms of, like, people wouldn't actually go and change the house very much at that point, just based on what's happened in Berkeley and other cities. And then recently, I think a year or so ago, there was some work done by a previous CAC member about a potential point of sale ordinance that would actually require upgrades when the house is sold. So there was some discussion of that, and some ideas floated, but not like the full development of an ordinance or anything. That didn't get up to the council level or anything like that.
Okay, that's helpful. I am mixed on this because I think there's some merit in having that kind of requirement. But our housing market is already like unsustainable, and so adding cost to it makes it for like even less affordable. So that's sort of, I'm not quite sure where that leaves me, but that's what I'm thinking.
I've had some discussions outside with, public people and council people, and, the whole idea of mandates versus incentives is an interesting dynamic. And the point of sale one especially is one that maybe there's room for an incentive that could go in now and run for some period of time, with the idea that there would be a mandate at some point in time in the future. And so there's incentive and then a mandate in the future. We heard from Jeff Bond, sort of the practicality of mandates here in this city is low because the enforcement. The enforcement would cost so much that it sort of negates the. We'd rather have an incentive program, put that money towards incentives. So, I think that would be something that would be interesting to pursue. Would be what can incentives do? And I think we've seen from the HVAC and water heater programs that is effective in getting people's attention. I liked what one of the public speakers said about more outreach and using some more of the community, like high school students, super tuned into social media, willing to go door to door. If the city could utilize more resources like that, might be a good avenue to pursue. I don't know if it's already been tried, but anyway. But anyway, I think that from what I've heard from other people, incentives at least are easier to implement, initially, and there's less, there's more positive money going towards something positive.
It's also worth noting about, I think it was about a month ago, there were some proposed updates to Berkeley's building emission saving ordinance standards that include some type of flexible credits that would qualify for some type of, electrification type credits, like if you have a heat pump, water heater, things like that. I'm not sure how that one has played out, but I think it's really worth us following and staying along on the political viability there, and if any concerns come up with like the real estate industry as well there.
Could you explain that? The credit, how does the credit work?
Yeah, from what I'm seeing here, they had put two potential ways for this to work, but one way was you had to have this flexible credit system, and you'd have to hit some type of credit to meet the standard, and you get a certain amount of credits for different electrification projects that you do or that are on the building.
And then you're required to meet the standard in order to?
I think so.
In order to do what? Sorry.
I heard a bit about this from some Berkeley staff recently. I didn't get the full down low on it, but yeah, it sounds like basically you're required to do some upgrades to the home, and there's some flexibility in exactly which upgrades you do, which is, I think, the credit thing Member Hodges is talking about. And then there's some detail in there about, the money for that as part of the escrow process, and they have a whole kind of system set up for that. But yeah, it's fairly new, and I'm not sure that's fully finalized yet. But definitely something I'm watching.
That's really interesting. I'd like to learn more about that. Comment on a comment. I think it's, in response to what you were saying, Eric, I think it's definitely both and, right? It's definitely incentives and mandates. I think we always have to utilize both. And to your point, any mandate, if we invented a mandate now, it wouldn't actually come into effect for many years to come. So I do think it would be a valuable use of time on this committee to weigh or to study more with Michelle sort of what the options are for mandates, because I do think, you start now and then you can say this is looming in the distance. We don't have to worry about the money for I don't think we have to worry too much about what it would cost to do enforcement, because I think people will be very motivated to get it done before there's a problem with enforcement. The question of having people door knocking and outreaching and stuff, is there any history of the city doing that, or helping facilitate that?
Not that I know of.
Yeah.
I mean, I know it's something that political candidates do on their own behalf, but I don't know of city staff doing that. As far as I know, it's pretty expensive, but I don't have a ton of background on it.
Trying to meld that. I think that was a valuable comment as well. I think that's a valuable thing to do, and I don't know how activist groups doing that and potentially student groups doing that sort of intersects with what this committee does. Curious about that. I don't actually have an idea. It's it sounds like a great thing to do, but I'm not sure if there's an action that we here would take pursuant to that.
Yeah, I mean, my kind of initial thought is that's probably something that's easier to do kind of from an activist level, just, activists organizing themselves to do outreach like that. I think it's difficult from a city level to try to do that, but
Yeah, I think it's something we would coordinate with. We've been providing information. We would, I think, be more than willing to help provide the information on incentives and continue to provide updated information, but probably something difficult for us to be able to staff up doing the door-to-door side of it.
That makes sense.
One related question I have, there has been some, there is outreach for related programs, right? Kind of food utensil bans or things like that. I guess maybe could you describe what kind of city involvement has been there reaching out to businesses? And is there anything that's similar we could do for electrification?
yeah, that's a great question. We haven't started our outreach to the businesses just yet. We're planning to launch that in January. But we are planning to include resources related to electrification and energy efficiency when we do that outreach. We don't want to overwhelm businesses with every resource known to man, but we are trying to kind of use those opportunities to do outreach on multiple items at once. We have also done some other outreach to businesses, in particular related to the Green Business Program. We have some green businesses in the city. It's sort of a county and actually statewide program where businesses, get certified, and there's some electrification items involved in that. So we've done some outreach, although to be honest, it hasn't been super effective in the city. So yeah, there's been some work, but there's a lot to be done.
One thing it was not in your presentation here, which was excellent, but it was in your write-up, and it's the idea of having an engineer on city staff to do electrification planning, and I wonder if that could be a part of outreach. We broadcast flyers, whatever, that we have this person who is available to help you, a building owner, multifamily, commercial, whatever, to figure out what the whole package would be if you wanted to electrify. And then the outreach would be just flyers all over the place, but then the people who were interested would come in and talk to the electrification expert. I'd really like to see something like that get off the ground, but I'm just not quite sure how to do it.
Yeah, like I said in the memo, we are looking into potential ways to incentivize electrification planning. It wouldn't necessarily be like a city staff person, but yeah, there's a few different routes it could go, either kind of someone supported or funded by the city, or a private party that's just, the city provides information about, there's a few different ways it might look, but yeah, we are looking right now at different possibilities for incentivizing that. And that's something I can bring back to the committee at some point once we get a little farther along. Also something we could potentially chat about within the electrification subcommittee too.
You mentioned something about speaking with businesses about a green business certification?
Mm-hmm.
What's the certifying body for that?
It's called the Green Business Network. It's a nonprofit that specifically does these certifications.
Would anyone like to add anything else?
I guess I'd also just like to agree with the commenters that sort of had a sense of urgency about it. I see no reason not to try and escalate to the green line and beyond. The sooner the better. We have this global climate inequity, right? Inequity. We, in our country and our culture, created a ginormous amount of emissions from which we prosper. We have wealth from the choices that we've all made collectively. And we should be using that wealth to accelerate our transition, in my opinion, as much as we can, because others are not as able as we are.
Do you have a recommendation for how to make that happen? I'm struggling with adding costs, as I mentioned in my early comment, that our real estate market is already so exclusive here in Albany that the mandates add cost and it make it even less equitable and more elite, and I struggle with that. But I agree with your comment, so I'm just expressing the struggle in my head right now with, I don't know how to actionize or whatever, take action on the concerns of those callers, because I also know how hard it is to afford Albany, and that the mandate would increase, that would just make it more difficult.
I mean, as someone from a family who recently entered this crazy real estate market, the sellers are making a tremendous amount of money on their sales. A tremendous, astronomical, sometimes five-fold profit on the sale of their properties. So, I mean, I see no reason why the seller shouldn't pay for it, but it sounds like the way Berkeley's doing it, it's something you can negotiate in escrow and decide between you who's going to pay for it. Yeah. And also, I mean, yes, the cost of a single-family home in Albany is so completely off the charts and so completely unattainable for most residents of the Bay Area, let alone, say, the state of California, that persons for whom you're expressing a concern about whether they're having an equitable experience is these people are quite privileged and quite wealthy. So I think when it comes to equity, I'm more concerned about the great bulk of people who cannot afford to buy a house in Albany, personally. Because the people who can afford represent a very upper echelon of earners.
Any other comments? Okay. If not, then we can move on to the next item. This is the second presentation.
Thank you, Chair. Give me a moment to bring this up. Good evening, committee members. Justin Freed, Transportation and Sustainability Manager. Nice to finally be here in front of you all tonight. I'm going to give you a brief presentation on the upcoming update to the active transportation plan. So, some context for preparing an active transportation plan. It is part of our City Council strategic plan for this cycle to do this update. It is in our climate action and adaptation plan. We also are looking at social equity and inclusivity goals, a couple of more specific questions that have come in prior Transportation Commission discussions regarding Solano Avenue and what that looks like in the future, as well as Marin Avenue. And the final goal is just maintaining funding eligibility for transportation projects moving forward. So as you all are likely aware, the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan has a goal for reducing passenger vehicle miles traveled by 25%, and the first action in the Advanced Active Shared and Electric Transportation Strategy is to develop a new active transportation plan. The current active transportation plan was adopted in 2012, and it's been amended twice since then, in 2014 and in 2019. It's a large document, has 5 goals, 11 policies, over 30 actions, and close to 30 projects within it. Typical scope of work in an active transportation plan includes reviewing the current context, plans, and existing conditions in the city, developing goals and objectives for the future. There's a large data collection element, looking at existing travel volumes by different modes, looking at safety issues, access issues, a robust amount of information gathered from public engagement, also regarding, where folks are trying to get to through active transportation, where are the barriers, what are the needs, and then goes into preparation of network diagrams to build out a more robust active transportation network, which then leads into identifying specific projects. And different active transportation plans take a little different tact within how detailed you go into the projects. Our current active transportation plan developed a lot of extensive project details. Others look at more of a toolkit of design elements and approaches, and some get into more specific project concepts and plans, or identifying areas or corridors for future study, or some combination of those. Might be the first highest priority projects go into more detail. Those are the ones that you're teeing up to go into development sooner, and the ones that are further down the road you lead to later in time to look at more closely. And then beyond that, the social justice and equity considerations in terms of types of projects, which projects are serving which users, what parts of the city, where are you prioritizing for the first round of projects, and looking at level of costs with those. So one of the key components is the facility networks diagrams. These are a couple within the existing active transportation plan, one that focus on sidewalk and pathways, the other focuses on the bicycle network. The current plan has 2 bicycle networks, what was at the time described as a fast network, and a slower, more comfortable network geared at different users. And so that's a sense of what we're going to be getting into. The next steps coming up are to issue a request for proposals, and we'll be then going into consultant selection and kicking off the project, hoping to kick off the project by summer of 2024. And with that, happy to take any questions.
I had a question. dog sheet. I received a flyer recently about a San Pablo corridor improvement project, and I'm wondering, I didn't see that referred to here. Is that because it's already fully baked?
Depends which project you're referring to. There are a number of projects on San Pablo, but all of those are, yes, farther along their actual projects, moving into design or construction phase, depending on which one you're referencing. This would be looking at sort of the next projects that need to be developed.
Okay, for the benefit of the committee members, the project I was looking at, it would reserve 2 of the existing 4 lanes on San Pablo Avenue exclusively for buses, and then all of the other vehicles would be in the other 2 lanes. And I think the flyer said it was going to be implemented in 2025.
So that's probably referencing a project that's in Oakland and Berkeley. Our stretch of San Pablo Avenue is not having those lane changes in that time frame. We're looking at bus stop boarding, in-lane boarding islands, and bike and pedestrian crossing improvements along San Pablo as part of that Alameda County Transportation Commission corridor project.
Thank you.
Let's see, I had a question about the active transportation plan that exists now, pursuant to reducing vehicle miles traveled by 25%. Did it include any way for like doing outreach and estimating a baseline for that and then measuring in a follow-up way how well we've done?
We rely on outside sources for vehicle miles traveled. We don't directly collect that ourselves.
Yeah, I do look into vehicle miles traveled every year for our key performance indicators update for our CAP. It's complicated and imperfect, but we do have some data sources that help us at least estimate how we're doing on that. Yeah, so I'll have more in the spring, and you can also look back. I think April was the last KPI update I did, so you can look at our VMT over the course of several years there.
So it's indirect, and then like what kind of a data source? Just that.
Previously, we had been using data that was from MTC, the Metropolitan Transportation Commission. They did estimates based on a whole data gathering survey that they did. Since 2020, that has shifted pretty radically, and they don't have as much data anymore. So we've moved over to getting data from Google now. They have Google Maps data that they're able to use for VMT calculations. So that's what we'll be using going forward, at least for the time being.
But honestly, that seems better anyway in terms of
It
that's
does
actual
seem
data,
like it's
real
more
cars.
accurate.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That's great. Is there any way on the question of vehicles miles traveled again to address the fact that like huge swaths of, say, Solano Ave, but also Marin are places in Albany traveled in vehicles for people coming and going to Berkeley? Like, so it's like, you know, you could have a great program in Albany, but.
So the way that VMT is calculated, for better or for worse, is it calculates the miles traveled for trips that either start or end in Albany. Cool. So if you drive from Berkeley down Marin to the highway and off to Richmond, that doesn't count for our VMT. And I don't know, you could argue either way on whether it should, but it doesn't based on the data that we have.
Thank you. That is also very cool. Okay, this is a totally different question. How, to date, maybe going forward with the new plan, has the city partnered with the school district on all these, like pedestrian and bicycle improvements?
I wasn't here during the development of the previous plan, but we do plan to have active involvement with our school and school community partners. We will put that within our request for proposals and see what we get from consultants, but we will also be very heavily involved in the outreach and engagement that's developed in the process.
That's great to hear, because I do think there's a lot of parent, I guess, advocacy around safety around the schools, which basically translates to pedestrian and cyclist safety. So I think there's a lot of untapped energy there to move changes more quickly. And I think I sense from the administrators I've spoken with that there's a wish to do that, but it does involve a lot of working together with the city. So if their priorities get written into the plan, so much the better. Thank you.
On the topic of schools, I noticed on the bike map that was displayed, there was no accommodation along Key Route from north of Solano. And I thought that was, which runs by the high school, I thought that was discussed and adopted, but my memory of it is very hazy, that they were going to change the configuration of Key Route in that strip.
So the Transportation Commission recommended a concept that does provide facilities along Key Route that was more recent. One of the reasons that we need to update is we've sort of pushed ideas beyond what's within the current plan.
Thank you.
Does the RFP also include a piece about like what outreach will be, public outreach?
Yes, we like to leave it pretty open for ideas from the consultant teams and the things that they find effective, but we will be looking for pretty extensive outreach for this process.
Thank you.
Any other questions? If not, we can move on to public comment.
I have one hand raised. Go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, hi, Nick Peterson. You know, active transportation is a key element of the climate action adaptation plan. And I get a little worried, you know, in the city of Albany, for a long time, cars have been king. And there's no parking restrictions. You can park all over the streets wherever you want. There's only time parking, and you can get a ticket around business zones. Otherwise, it's free parking everywhere all the time, 24/7, the last 50, 100 years or whatever it's been. So this has been totally ingrained as sort of one of the key values of Albany, is that your car, you can just go park anywhere, drive all over the place. And the problem with a truly robust and effective active transportation plan is that you've got to demote cars. You've got to put in improvements for pedestrians and bicyclists that actually demote and cars take a second sort of place to. This doesn't mean you make it more dangerous for them, but it might mean you have to eliminate some parking, which of course in Albany is like a crisis where people fall on the ground and foam in the mouth. So I really want to encourage you guys to make some sort of statement or declaration that you recognize that, you know, this will have some negative impacts on car travel in the city, and it just has to, because there's only a limited amount of street resource. We can't put everything off on little side streets and other places and makes, you know, pedestrians and bicyclists second-class citizens. What we're trying to do is encourage more people to drive, not to placate the people that are driving already, which will have zero impact on vehicle miles driven, especially single occupant vehicle miles driven. If it was harder to drive your car around Albany, more people do, I think, now walk or take a bike because they know, do I really want to bang my head against the wall trying to park around, you know, 5 beers and a taco, or I'm just going to ride my bike down there and I can get, and 5 beers and a taco still has a lot of business. they're not losing it. I mean, they even got rid of parking spaces in front of their own shop to have more seating. So this whole idea that everything lives and dies from people's ability to get in a car and drive somewhere and park 20 steps from it has got to go. You've got to fight back against that. And I know there are a lot of very vocal and angry people that always show up and scream and yell and write letters. But I think, you know, part of what I'm going to try to do with Albany Climate Action Coalition is get more of the public out there that do support these bikes, and you see them going on Masonic Way with their kids, and they're, you know, there's a whole contingent now with electric bikes that are much more interested in getting out and being in the traffic. So we need to make sure that the plan states cars are not king. Thank you.
Go ahead, Lucinda.
Yes, this is Lucinda Young, and I would like to support what the previous speaker, Nick Peterson, just shared. My recollection is approximately 50% of our carbon emissions are from transportation, which is predominantly private vehicle. That's got to change. And having safe bicycle routes and safe pedestrian walkways is absolutely key to getting more people out of their cars and using active transportation. It's unrealistic to think that everybody is going to move to an electric vehicle, and that electric vehicles are part of the solution, but they are not the sole solution. So I would support strong measures to encourage active transportation and to make it less convenient for cars, to really change the culture that cars take priority over every other form of transportation. That's just not a sustainable model for our future. Thank you.
Go ahead, Catherine.
With Albany Climate Action Coalition, want to agree with the previous speakers and also add, if there are challenges with mobility for people with disabilities, definitely keep disabled parking, but you can reduce the parking for folks who are able and have the ability to move actively to places on bike and foot. There's a great cartoon I saw recently that said, cars run on money and burn oil, and bikes burn fat and save you money. So, good way to think about it. And I also want to share that electric vehicles are nice. I think they're great as an option, but e-bikes are actually cutting global oil demand by 1 million barrels a day. So e-bikes can make things more accessible for carrying large amounts of groceries, for transporting small family members and packages and whatnot. So I just want to echo the comments about making e-bikes more accessible. And I know that there are some rebates for low-income folks for e-bikes that could be extended further. And I just want to echo the previous comments on the importance of biking and walking. Thank you.
That's all the public comments.
If anybody has any comments on this presentation.
I'll just say, thank you for that presentation, Justin. Really excited for the update of this plan. Would echo one of the commenters' last notes about e-bikes. I don't think they were as popular the last time this plan was made, and I think, I've heard things saying like e-bikes are the new like minivans, and I think there's a lot to be said if we can, continue ways to make, e-bikes feel safe on streets.
I'm wondering if there's a way that the callers and those of us on the committee can participate and advocate for those things. What's the best way to go about doing that?
I'll have more information once we're starting the planning process, but
After the RFP?
once we've
Yeah.
kicked off and surely have a project website and ways to stay engaged and as that develops.
Excellent, thank you.
just a reminder that City Council actually approved having a combo of our committees with the Transportation Commission. And Ken McCroskey is the member that can work with our subcommittee. So we can, have a direct input on that respect. So I think this committee, I'm speaking out of turn, let me know, but I think we can, formulate ideas and take them back to our counterpart and have some direct input, because I think the City Council has agreed that there's a very close tie-in with active transportation plan and climate action plan, so there's open communication there.
Right. I'm enthusiastic about what Dan was saying and had the same question, because I really feel like we can't meet any goals in the CAP without supporting everything that transportation and active transportation wants to do. But I'm curious about I think the subcommittee that was talking about transportation previously was talking about EVs. Are you guys also interested in talking about?
We call ourselves zero energy transportation
Okay.
in an effort to say it's more than just EVs.
Great.
So, yeah, it's bicycles, pedestrians, e-bikes, electric vehicles is all under the purview of the Zero Energy Transportation Subcommittee.
Hooray.
Yay.
Yeah. Yeah, please report back to us what we can do, because,
Zero emission.
Yeah.
Is that what I said?
Zero energy.
Oh, right. Zero emissions. Thank you.
yeah.
Any other comments?
This is a very qualitative comment, but related. I've been hanging out a lot more in Emeryville lately, and those who follow this whole realm or might be aware that that's a very bike and pedestrian-friendly city. So it's about the same size city as us, but they're really going all out. And so I guess just for those on the committee who are not aware of all the things they're doing, look into it, because those are all things we could do, and there's so many of them. There's so many great things to do, and it's just a pleasant place to be on foot or on a bike there. We could do that, but to the point that I think Nick was making, like we face a lot more resistance when we do it, because in that city there are not as many people who depend so hard on their cars. It's easier to get places on transit there, and there's a lot more businesses per square foot than we have here. So it would be more of a political battle for us to do those kinds of things, but a very worthy one I hope we can all help with.
I was just saying that's a great comment, because one of the pushbacks that one of the comments is often made is that protecting the businesses of Solano Avenue especially. And if you just said there's even more businesses in downtown Emeryville that would have an even bigger voice in that. So that's a great positive example. I want to see Solano Avenue continue to be vibrant. That's part of the heart of Albany, but absolutely supporting, wanting to get more active transportation to those businesses and getting business buy-in. That I love the Five Tacos example. They got rid of their parking so they could expand seating. So.
I see a need there from the city in terms of outreach to businesses. If we can get them information, maybe as part of active transportation plan, about the benefits to the business community to have it be easier to walk and bike places, because there are benefits, and I think you often hear a more conservative and car positive message from some business groups that may or may not be fact-based. And so there might be just some facts that we could offer and some outreach.
Any other comments? If not, I think we can move on to the next item.
this one is me again. Just a second. Okay, so I don't have a PowerPoint for this one, so I'll just chat about it for a minute. So this item is a draft resolution declaring a climate emergency. I'll make a few notes about this. So first of all, just want to clarify some of the terms here. So this, more than an emergency declaration, it's a resolution declaring an emergency, because unlike something like, the COVID declaration of emergency that the state and federal government passed, this isn't a policy shift in that, it's not releasing any funds, it's not creating new powers for the city. It's really more of a statement. It has kind of a political significance rather than a legal or financial significance. So just want to clarify that off the bat. But this is something we heard requests for from the committee and from public commenters. So our Civic Spark fellow Sutton did some research and drafted up this resolution. This is based on a template created by the Climate Mobilization Project. There have been a few cities in the region that have passed essentially this same resolution with, everyone has their own slightly different version. So there's been Alameda, Berkeley, Oakland, Hayward, and San Leandro that have all passed a resolution declaring climate emergency, all roughly the same as this template. Like I said, there are, a few little differences. This one in particular, we put in some language specific to our cap. But yeah, so, and it comes from this Climate Mobilization Project, which does a lot of work related to, to climate policy on the local and state level. And according to my understanding, they actually worked with Berkeley specifically in developing this template. And some of the pieces of it were a bit more specific to Berkeley and specific to some of the work being done at that time, I think in 2018. So there are some bits that we cut out related to that. I won't go through it in its entirety, since that's probably not a great use of our time. But basically, it covers some of the kind of main facts about why climate change is an emergency, some of the things that are happening, and our focus in transitioning in a just way in order to prevent or mitigate climate change. We also mentioned the goals of our CAP, which we've talked about a couple times tonight. And then the resolutions, basically talking about, the declaration that this is an emergency and the work that needs to be done at a high level to address it. I'll also note that Member Hodges also submitted his own draft resolution. Sorry, I have to reshare that apparently. There we go. So this is a copy of Member Hodges' resolution, similar in the kind of layout of explaining the reason that it's an emergency, and then resolutions related to what the city can do to address it at a high level. So similar, but some differences in language. Our staff recommendation is to recommend that the city council adopt the staff resolution. However, the committee could instead adopt Member Hodges or kind of combine them, make some edits. I will say that if the committee wanted to make substantive edits, it might be smart to kind of make a plan for members in a subcommittee to do that outside of the actual meeting if there's kind of a lot of work to be done. Or, if the committee wanted to table it for a later time and kind of work on it in a larger scope. That could also be something done in a future meeting. But minor edits could be made in this meeting if the committee was interested in doing that and then passing a recommendation to council. So, yeah, with that, I'll take any questions. Yeah, I'll take questions now before we get into the meat of it.
So you mentioned that the staff recommendation is to adopt the staff written one, and I'm wondering if you could say a little more about that. Why that one?
So, when we developed it, we didn't actually work with Member Hodges on the development of this. That sort of came at the end of the week when we were starting to post things. So it's nothing against Member Hodges's draft. Ours we put together really just based off of what other cities nearby were doing. That's pretty common with a lot of the work we do, is we try to kind of be in step with what's happening in the county and in the region. But there's no particular reason that it should be this exact wording rather than that exact wording. They're pretty similar on the kind of general approach, so it's not to say that one is much more appropriate than the other.
Is now the time when I might ask Member Hodges a question, or would that come during discussion?
Yeah, if it's a question, now would be a fine time for that, yeah.
Okay. I'm just wondering if there were elements of the staff recommendation that fell short in your opinion, or things that you included in yours that you felt were essential, elements that didn't appear in the staff version.
Yeah, sure. And yeah, just to give a little bit of background, yeah, I think it was just maybe like a small little coordination. I definitely, really appreciate what staff has done, and I think overall I would, love to see us move forward with either version or like what they're recommending on theirs. I'd say maybe the small difference I saw on the one I'd put forward, I have one line there about the youth of Albany and how they play an important role. And I think given, that we have active members of the youth here on the committee, and we have such strong youth participation and kind of population in the city, I think that would be an important line I'd like to see included as well. Overall, I like staff's focus as well on how they set up the problem, representing the CAP, and some of the specific actions Albany is making.
Thanks. I just wanted there was a typo in the staff version that references residents of Oakland. So I didn't want to forget to point that out, that if we move that forward, it needs that cleanup.
Great catch. You can see how closely we like to follow our neighboring cities. Thanks. Any other questions? No. Oh, yeah.
I'm sure you would have said if there was, but I mean, in reading both of them, I didn't see anything that was more actionable, or, as you said, it's a declaration of, a statement of condition, not adding any funds or anything like that. Member Hodges, I didn't see anything that was more like actionable or commitment oriented. But I just wanted to ask if you felt that there was something different.
No, as well. I kept it more focused on the declaration itself, and more specific actions that might involve funding. Seem like something to be done outside this. Yep. And then also, did want to acknowledge the edits and review from Councilmember Melgen as well. That was very helpful for this draft we submitted.
I have a question. For the cities that adopted a similar resolution, did they just do the declaration, or did they have any actionable items or anything?
Yeah, great question. So Sutton is really the expert on this, but I asked him about this before. It sounds like the declaration that had the most action items was Berkeley's, and those were fairly specific to, I forget exactly there was some sort of event happening in 2019, like some kind of a climate summit. So there were action items specific to the work that they were going to be doing for that climate summit. And the rest of them were pretty similar in that they're kind of high level and not getting into the more specific policy or action item.
This is maybe a legalistic question, but is it possible in these things to use language like the city will prioritize climate action in all of their affairs and so forth?
Not being the city attorney, I don't know that I can fully speak to that. In a resolution, I think you have to be careful what you're committing to future action if it's not really something you can commit to in that moment, or if it's something that involves funding, or you're sort of committing future action, that it gets into, I think, some more dangerous
Maybe
territory.
You could say the city will, as long as the thing you're saying doesn't cost money or require legal changes. Okay, all right.
If there are no other questions, I think we can move on to public comment.
Currently, there are 2 hands raised. Go ahead, Nick.
Hi, Nick Peterson, Albany Climate Action Coalition. So first of all, yay. And we've been working pretty long and advocating pretty strongly for this all the time. And, you know, ACAC definitely supports doing a climate emergency declaration. That said, the way this was presented, it doesn't sound, and I'll get into some specifics, it's a little watered down, and I'm very concerned it's more of a feel-good statement that really has zero impact on how the city conducts business. And that's not the point. It should include some really good, direct, and be it further resolved statements that require real action, like the city will create and fill the position of a dedicated climate action manager to oversee coordination of all city efforts and integration of CAP requirements. The city will adequately fund and do budget planning to support immediate climate action efforts. The city will establish milestones starting now for each budget cycle that lead to goals established by the CAP. And the city will obtain adequate counsel on grant and funding sources and opportunities in order to maximize sources of achieving CAP goals, especially for low-income and underserved community members. So, I mean, there's got to be something the city has to do. You've just announced an emergency that's like existential for all of humanity and everybody in the city, and then to just have it be wishy-washy and like, oh, it doesn't mean anything, and the city doesn't really need to do anything. And maybe we shouldn't say will, the city should, they must, the city will do things. I don't understand why that can't be in here. And don't say we have to talk to council, because council is a private party that is, you know, hired by the city. Of course, they're thinking about covering their own ass and not about city issues, and they'll just say, don't go out on a limb. I mean, our city should be run by the city council, the city legal council. This is something that the residents want. We want to make sure the city takes action. And taking action means you put in here what's some actions that make sense in acknowledging that we've got this emergency situation. You can't just say, hey, the house is burning down, and then say, but everyone stay seated at the table eating your dinner, because it's, you know, we really can't do anything about the house burning down because we don't know if we have the money for it. I mean, it's just nonsensical otherwise. I feel very strongly about that, obviously. But anyway, it's good. I encourage the Climate Action Committee members to really think this through clearly. I think putting a piece of feel-good out there that doesn't require the city to take any action or meet anything is pointless, to be blunt. Thank you.
Go ahead, Lucinda.
Lucinda Young here. thank you. I'm very glad to see this draft, couple draft climate emergency declarations, and I've looked at both of them. And I do think they serve even as is, without any additional action language. Which I agree with Nick, it would be best to have some more specific action language here. But even within that, without that, I do think it serves the purpose of making a statement. It may be to some extent symbolic, but we're trying to motivate the residents of Albany to act. We're trying to motivate staff to act with a greater sense of urgency. So I think this will have some effect even without the action items in the resolution. I do, and I think both committee member Hodges and the staff's resolutions, I've read both of them, they're good. I do think that what I do like about Hodges' resolution is it does refer in several paragraphs to effects specifically on the city of Albany, whereas the effects in the staff draft is more general. And I also, I would love to see in this resolution some statement to the effect further resolve that all decisions by the city shall take into account the decision's impact of the climate action and adaptation plan as part of its deliberation process, or something to that effect. And that adequate staff should be allocated to carry out the goals of the CAP to address the climate emergency. I do want to mention one additional typo, not a big deal, but in the last whereas clause on the staff draft, it says climate action, and it should be it says climate and adaptation plan. It should be climate action and adaptation plan. Again, not a big deal, but minor typo there. But overall, I think this is helpful, and hope that the committee will decide to recommend this to City Council. Thank you.
Hi, this is Catherine with the Albany Climate Action Coalition. I want to thank everyone who helped make this a reality. I'm very excited and heartened to see that we are taking suggestions of the ACAC to recommend the Climate Emergency Declaration for City of Albany. This is a really big step, and I want to thank you for your hard work on this, and I want to agree with the previous speakers as well. Thank you.
Go ahead, David.
Hi, this is David Wimmer. I do agree with Nick's suggestions. It'd be nice to have some action items in there, but I'm impatient. I want to just have it passed, and I'll be happy with its current form. And I just think if we it'll just take more time, more delays to try and get it right, so to speak, by adding some actions and such. I just want to get it passed and be able to point to it when I'm talking to other citizens and such, and say, look, the city passed this emergency resolution. It's the real deal. We got to step up, and we can take the actions that are needed. Whether they're in this resolution or not, emergency declaration or not. I just say just move it forward ASAP. And thank you for bringing it and getting it here to the table. Thank you.
No more hands raised.
You had a comment, right?
My sense is that the city of Albany is actually, or has control over a fairly small percentage of the city's carbon emissions. The school district has control over a fairly small percentage. And I haven't done a heck of a lot of investigation, but what I've seen suggests that the city and the school district are putting a pretty strong priority on reducing carbon emissions. I was hoping that the climate emergency declaration would fall more along the lines that Lucinda Young suggested, that we try to motivate Albany's citizens to act. And what's in here is not that. There's a lot of stuff about how the city will do things that, in my mind, we're pretty much already doing. Maybe we could do a little bit harder. So I would like to have the climate declaration specifically ask citizens to take steps to reduce fossil fuels, such as by taking fewer airplane flights and driving EVs if you can afford them, and putting in heat pumps for space heating, because those, I think, are the three biggest individual actions where people can cut their CO2 emissions. So my focus for this is for the city council to say, we are doing a lot. You know, we've put the default to be 100% zero carbon electricity. We will continue to do that. We will continue to prioritize, but we would like the citizens to step up. And here's some examples of things we would like them to do. So that was my vision of this. I'll let people discuss that.
That's really cool. That never occurred to me. Because my whole frustration with this whole ongoing thing, where we've been asked many times by commenters to pass a declaration, is that such a declaration felt to me symbolic. And it was funny to me to hear the criticism that it's symbolic, because it generally is in all cities and has been. So I thought it was for the symbolic import that we were being asked to do this. That said, I favor between these two. I would support either between these two versions. I favor the one that Troy wrote because of its simplicity. It's easier to read. It has less preamble. It's more to the point. But I love the idea of augmenting it with calls to action for individuals. That wouldn't be symbolic, I feel like.
I guess I was feeling like this is a big step in symbolism for the city, because if you think about the fact that we don't have a declaration of a climate emergency right now, kind of puts us into that class of cities that says there isn't one, or we're not ready to make that statement. So I like this because it moves us into that class of cities that says there is a climate emergency. And yeah, it doesn't have specific things that are actionable, but this is a statement. This is moving us into a position where we have even more collateral to say our programs are important, City Council, and I think it's up to us to take that declaration and keep moving our programs forward. I don't think that this declaration needs to say exactly what's going to happen. I think that this moves us into a position where we have even more leverage. So that's why I would support it as written.
I generally agree with those comments. I think a lot of the interesting discussion is around what the solutions are going to be, and I think the action plan has a ton of that in there. I am worried that it'll bog down getting a declaration declared, and that there'll be a lot of different visions for what the solutions are that might not be the best place for this particular document. And I think, I just had one comment on the inspiring people to action too. I do think that is very important, and I think I would want to see it done in a way that doesn't place blame on individual residents. I think there's a lot to be said that a lot of climate challenges are more about just like the systems we live in, that we have to use cars and it's expensive to electrify and things like that. So I just want to make sure that it's more inspiring than, acting negative or putting any type of negative pressure on residents. Might feel turned off by the city telling them to do something.
I was just wondering if people think there's enough revision needed to create a subcommittee or ad hoc committee or whatever. I think that was Michelle's suggestion, that we don't wordsmith it here, and if it needs wordsmithing, we can go back and do so and come back. And I don't know if that's warranted or not, but just sort of thought I'd throw that question out.
I guess one question on process there, would we then bring it back for one more vote before going to city council, or can we kind of like pre-approve it and then?
If you're making substantive changes, you would need to bring it back to the committee for approval, and then it would go on to the council.
I could go either way, either approving something now or letting something be workshopped. I think we could potentially save time at a future meeting by just giving all our input now, and then whomever's workshopping it will make sure to incorporate all that. And we won't have much to say about it next time, except this.
What edits would we make, like if we did have a committee?
I mean, I really liked what Mark was saying. I'd like to see one little clause, like, just sort of, to Troy's point, supportively, like, promoting things citizens can do. Like, I'm not sure where that would go in whereas citizens can do a bunch of stuff, or whether it goes in therefore the city will support citizens in making personal changes such as. I'd like to see a bit about that.
For what it's worth, I did draft a version of the first paragraph, so I'll just read it and you'll see if I lean too hard towards blaming and shaming people as opposed to asking people. I appreciate that comment. So what I wrote was a resolution of the City Council of the City of Albany, California, declaring a climate emergency, calling for prioritization of emission reductions by all city departments, and asking citizens to reduce their use of fossil fuels by means such as minimizing air travel, driving electric vehicles if possible, and using heat pumps for space heating. And then the rest of it, I didn't make any changes at all. And again, the goal, I read this and I look at this emergency mobilization, and, well, Nick Peterson said this pretty forcefully, eloquently, I thought. Where are the actionable items in this? And what I wrote doesn't have anything that's really actionable for the city, but at least we're asking the people of Albany, who are unfortunately responsible for the bulk of the emissions here, to please try to do something about it. And here are the three things. I'm not sure that people know what the three biggest personal sources of emissions are. I'll just give a little anecdote. I happened to be talking to the son of a good friend of mine the other day. He lives in Albany. He and his wife are remodeling. He didn't know what a heat pump was. So just putting this right in the front so that people read this and get the idea, hey, you know, this maybe this will move the needle a little bit. I agree that this is mostly a political statement, and that's important. But I think it would be nice to have some ask in there as well for the citizens. That's my two bits. I'll be quiet now.
I guess I liked what you, I mean, that seems like a good addition, because it's it's laying out what individuals can do. It's not mandating that they have to do it. It's not putting a timeline or something like that. It's saying here's here's your, here's the city's statement, and here's what you as city residents can do. So I would support that. I still think that this is, as a document is serving its purpose as it is in other cities of just making a clear statement from the city. And then it's up to us to keep acting on programs that are very specific and actionable. Yeah, I think what you said was a reasonable addition.
What if we added like something about like the involvement of community members within the climate action committee and like what's going on with climate action in Albany? Because I feel like that part would make it seem like we want their input, and so it'd be more like encouraging to them as well. And maybe we could also like add involvement with community members and the youth.
I think Troy covered at least some of that. There's further down in his, I was just talking about the very first paragraph. That's the only place where I propose changes. But further on down, he's got stuff about bringing in citizens and bringing in the youth of Albany and so on. And I wouldn't want to change that.
Well, I'll just say in terms of, procedurally moving forward, I think it sounds like there's some consensus about some edits to be made and possibly bringing it back for a future meeting with some more substantive edits. And if that is the way that the committee wants to go, you could either assign an individual member to work on those edits and bring a new draft. Or you could, if there were multiple members that wanted to work on it, you could create a new subcommittee to do that.
Procedurally, is it possible for said individual or subcommittee to sort of like pass the draft around? I know that we can't meet outside of the meeting. Could it go from one person to the next?
No, so there'd be a 3-person maximum to be working on a draft outside of public meetings, and then you'd have to post that publicly for the next meeting in order for everyone to be seeing and commenting on it. Of course, if it's something that you kind of want to be iterative with and work as a subcommittee and then the committee and back and forth, it can come back for multiple meetings. There's nothing wrong with that procedurally, but you can't have more than 3 people working on it outside of the public meeting.
Also, we have 5 minutes left.
Yes.
So if there are any motions to extend time or anything.
What else is left on the agenda? I don't have it in front of me. Is this sort of the last item plus subcommittee updates, or?
Yeah, this and then subcommittee updates, future agenda items.
Sounds like we should extend a little bit. How about I make a motion to extend no later than 9:15?
Yeah, I would second that.
Okay, Member Hodges? Yes. Member Larson?
Yes.
Member Lieberman?
Yes.
Member Melgen?
Yes.
Member Vahil McClanahan?
Yes.
Chair Mohammed?
Yes.
Well, if there's going to be a subcommittee, I'll volunteer to be on it.
Can I just make one comment just before we
Sure,
do
go
that?
ahead.
So, I guess I'm feeling like if it goes to a subcommittee, I'm just wondering what we're trying to do with this statement here. Because if it goes to a subcommittee, I'm afraid that it's going to become a climate action plan. It's going to become everything we want to do, which we already have. And so I'm not personally. I'm not feeling like there's a reason to not take this with minor edits tonight. I'm not seeing the need for a subcommittee to revamp this myself. So, I don't know how we do this procedurally, but, I mean, that's just my personal opinion. I would rather see us go forward with this with maybe members Melgen's minor edits, if we agree on that. And I think getting this moving forward is more important than crafting it, and I'm afraid that it's going to become, like, everybody's going to have input on what actions we want to add to this, and it's going to be incomplete. And, anyway, that's my opinion.
I'll just add there, yeah, if there's like a couple, like a few clauses to add in to one of the drafts, that would be something we could do tonight. If it's a little more extensive and we want to play around with the language and stuff, that would be something for a subcommittee.
I hear that concern, and I would say one could just agree to have a very short-lived subcommittee, like a 1 to 2 month lifespan subcommittee, because I concur. There's no need to spend a ton of time on this yet. Since we've gone to all this trouble so far, we might as well make it say whatever we want it to say.
So we could bring it to a vote next meeting. So like, if people took it back to a committee and made whatever edits, then they could bring it back here at the next meeting and we could
Yes.
vote to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm okay with that. Just one person's.
Okay, I guess I would support that. Short-lived subcommittee.
Just to clarify, is there direction to the subcommittee beyond the amendment that committee member Melgen was suggesting?
Well, I don't know. I think there's some, the two things I noted was the thing that committee member Melgen was suggesting, I think you'd have to decide, are they happy with the wording? Is that word, because right now it's kind of in the title, so it maybe belongs in a different place in the document. And then the other thing I heard mention is Chair Mohammed saying, is there a clear call out to working, how can the community be involved? And that's the only two things that I noted people wanted to add. And I don't think we actually have any consensus on which of the two documents we want to use. So that would be the third action, but I think all that could be done in a month.
Yeah, I'd say the fourth would be to consider some of the public comments around stronger action language and see where it might make sense to include that.
Any other comments?
Yeah, I agree with that. A 1 month subcommittee sounds like a good time box to put on it, and I would be happy to join said committee if it forms.
So if there's an agreement on that, someone could make a motion to form the subcommittee.
Sure. I'll make a motion to create a climate emergency declaration subcommittee.
Second?
I'll second the motion, but every subcommittee should have 3 members, right?
Sorry, say it again. What was that?
Every subcommittee should have 3 members. It's customary.
I can commit to one subcommittee meeting. If that is of use to the other subcommittee members, I'm happy to join.
All right, so we've got a motion and a second to create the Climate Emergency Declaration Subcommittee with members Hodges, Melgen, and Vahil McClanahan. So a vote. Member Hodges.
Yes.
Member Larson.
Yes.
Member Lieberman.
Yes.
Member Melgen.
Yes.
Member Vahil McClanahan.
Yes.
Chair Mohammed.
Yes.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
And then we'll move on to the next item, which is subcommittee updates. For the Environmental Justice Subcommittee, we haven't really done any action at the moment. We're just like researching what we can do around the community. And then for the Student Outreach and Engagement Subcommittee, I know Mira is working with people from Berkeley for a curriculum for elementary students, and we're also contacting elementary teachers and seeing their input and what they want to see in our resolution. Yeah, that's it.
We can go ahead and run through all of the subcommittee updates before public comments, if that's preferable.
For zero emission transportation, I am still working on two proposals to bring to the committee. One is city fleet vehicle replacement with electric vehicles, and the other one is charging stations at city-owned locations. So I've talked with my city council member, Lopez, about it. Got some input from him. I've got some input from Michelle as far as previous studies have been done, so I just haven't had a chance to, other things going on. So anyway, I will try to bring a proposal in January for those two things.
Sure, yeah. So this was the first meeting as a subcommittee for the home electrification subcommittee version, whatever year this is. So we did just some housekeeping stuff, but we also talked about a communication Mark's been working on, just encouraging homeowners to electrify. So I think that will be coming out maybe next month or soon. And sharing, resources for electrification. Then another thing that we talked about that I don't know what the action timeline is for it, was talking about, this really got covered in Michelle's presentation, I think, the logistics of home electrification and things like panel upgrades and planning for your whole house. So I don't know, in terms of an action out of our subcommittee, when that will manifest, but it's something we're working on.
I won't take long, but yeah, I'm not used to working on committees, and I'm a little personally frustrated at just trying to figure out what to do, because I think it would be great to have a program where we send out flyers and Albany people could come and get some, maybe they have to pay a little bit of money, but then they could have an expert come and assess their structure, single-family home, whatever, and get an estimate of what would be needed and what it would cost. But from that goal to an action plan is a gap, and I'm having trouble figuring out how to bridge that. And two people have joined the subcommittee, and I'm delighted that more people to talk about. But addressing that gap is something that I'm having trouble with.
All right, any questions?
Can I comment on that, or is that,
Why don't you keep it to a question for now, and then after public comment, we can chat more.
If there are no questions, we can move on to public comment.
We have one hand raised. Go ahead, Nick.
Hi, Nick Peterson with Albany Climate Action Coalition. It's good to hear this. A lot of good work can happen in subcommittees, and I kind of sympathize with Mark's frustration with, how do you work in a subcommittee? It's just the really stilted environment that the Brown Act creates, where you just can't get a lot of brainstorming going, and you sort of shoehorn it in with just a couple people and then bring it back. But I think if you try to pursue, kind of brainstorm, it's more like brainstorming sessions and putting that together. So I'm glad that that's still happening with the Zero Emissions Transportation Subcommittee. I applaud with the areas that Eric said he was focusing on. I think those are good. We still need those public charging stations out there. I also think that we need to do phase 2 of the multifamily housing EV charging program and get some results back from that. The earlier one about cost and how to proceed with that, I think there's a lot going on that level. And then the home electrification mandate subcommittee, again, you know, I'll try to send some more information to the committee. I know I heard a lot of comments about, oh, it'll raise the cost of housing, and I think one of the committee members made a good point about, you know, houses around me, and this is unique to Albany, I mean, it doesn't happen everywhere, but, you know, they're going for 20 to 50 to almost 100% over asking price. People have that much money to throw around. They can put a little bit of money to make sure the house doesn't emit. So if anyone's driving up housing costs, it's probably, people exciting the market and convincing people to do 50% over asking price bids. So I won't name any names. So anyway, I think these subcommittees are good, and I'm glad you made the subcommittee to put in some extra study on this emergency declaration. I'll send some comments myself to the committee so you can perhaps look at those. Thank you very much.
Go ahead, Lucinda.
This is Lucinda Young, and I just had a couple comments. Committee member Melgen had mentioned on home electrification, if there was someone who could do an assessment of the home and provide a plan. I wanted to make the committee aware, and I know Michelle's already aware, but I'm not sure if all committee members are aware that there are businesses out there. For example, Quick Carbon does this service for homeowners, and they provide it. There's no fee up front to the homeowner. They do get a percentage from the contractor, but there are those services available. Bay Rent also does a lot of that help with for homeowners. So those services are out there. And I also, I'm happy that the committee considered the climate emergency declaration. I do have a few comments that I will email. I have concerns about putting in these declarations specific actions for citizens to take, because there are so many actions. Look at Project Drawdown, and I think it's, if you look at the other declarations issued by, literally thousands of jurisdictions, they do not have the specific actions for citizens to take. That's not really the purpose here of the declaration. I think we're getting beyond the purpose of the declaration. And how are you going to, Committee member Malcolm, I think, pulled out 3 things that he felt was important: airfare, heat pumps. All of those are important, but so many other things are important. The food choices people make are so important. Are we going to put that in there? The the purchase of consumer goods and services, are we going to put that in there? It's just too broad to try to tell citizens what they should be doing, and I think we run the risk of putting too much, as someone said earlier, guilt tripping citizens. So I think that should be left off the declaration, and I'll send an email that goes in after I sort my thoughts out a little bit better on that. But thank you.
Go ahead, David.
Hi, David Wimmer again. I want to put in my 2 cents worth about the point of sale requirements and such. Might raise the prices of houses. I totally do not agree with that. People buy a house and they just pay what they can afford. It's not as if the owner decides on a sale price and then it's going to add $25,000 for point of sale electrification upgrades. It's the market determines what the sale is, and that's what the owner gets. And if the owner has to, you know, invest $20,000, he gets less profit, but it doesn't raise the market price of the house. That's determined by interest rates and people's incomes and what they can afford. And then moving on to another subject about, you know, outreach to the community and doing pamphlets or things like that, you know, dropping those off on people's doorsteps, et cetera. I was hoping that, you know, maybe we could have a public-private partnership with volunteers like myself. If the city would, you know, printed up materials that, you know, just like election-type materials, you know, can volunteers distribute those, or is there some kind of a, you know, there's liability issues if we're, quote, volunteers, but we're handing out city materials, does that make us, you know, quote, employees, and you get liability and such? I don't know, but if there isn't any of those types of issues, I would think, you know, we could find citizens that would volunteer and get those distributed, just like around election time. And that's it. Thank you.
I'll just note the time is now 9:11, and we're currently extended to 9:15.
That's the end of public comment.
Should I make a motion for like 5 minutes more,
If you'd like.
just in case?
Yeah, we'll probably, unless we want to run really quickly, we'll probably need a couple more minutes.
Second.
For 5 minutes, you said? So 9:20? Okay. Okay, Member Hodges? Yes. Member Larson?
Yes.
Member Lieberman?
Yes.
Member Melgen?
Yes.
Member Vahil McClanahan?
Yes.
Chair Mohammed?
Yes. Okay, we can move on to discussion for the, subcommittee updates? Yeah. I just had one question. If you guys knew any, like, climate parent groups or anything like that, or people that work with the school or anything that maybe want to get involved in writing a curriculum or a resolution for the student outreach and engagement subcommittee, because we want to know their kind of like input on this, if you guys know of anything.
I don't know of a parent-based group, but whomever's on the district committee for climate stuff in the school district, those are primarily parents. So they'd probably be interested.
Any other comments on any of the subcommittee updates?
I mean, I remember maybe Eric was going to share a comment about what Mark was saying about the frustration of moving things forward. I guess my sense at the end of our first meeting was that that was a proposal that you were making, and that we, in fact, talked about quick carbon and conversations that Michelle had with them and the pros and cons of their approach. And so my sense coming away from the meeting was that we're working on that, but there isn't yet any consensus that that's the thing we want to do, that that's the way we want to approach the problem. I don't know.
I guess what I was going to say was just a reminder that, yeah, it's a frustrating process because we're in the city government. So, but the success that we've had is subcommittee has the latitude to discuss things freely, openly amongst your subcommittee. You form a proposal, bring it to the committee. It gets sent to city council. City council accepts it, creates an action that then goes to the city manager, and then something happens. So it's a circuitous route, but we can start it. We can provide the push for it, and that's sort of our role. And we've seen it work with the the charging station pilot that got funded and got done. So I know it feels like a long and looping process, but, you know, the frustration from the subcommittee, yeah, but it's also an opportunity to talk openly and to discuss things and come up with something you feel good as a proposal you can bring the committee, and then we can, you know, push it through that route. So I just, that's the success that I've seen in this process, even though it takes a while.
Thank you.
Any other comments? If not, we can move on to future agenda items. Are there any requests from future agenda items?
Just a request for the subcommittee update so that I can put my proposals to the committee if I manage to get mine done. For zero energy, or zero emission transportation.
Yeah, certainly I'd like to see agendized again, returning to the emergency declaration so we can get that done.
Any other requests? We do have a hand raised. Considering the time, maybe it's smart to do a smaller public comment window, maybe 1 minute as a suggestion.
Sure.
We have 2 hands.
Go ahead, Nick.
Okay, in 1 minute. I think it'd be good to have an update on the DOE-funded gas pruning study, which I think the committee should look into as leveraging that to put on, say, part 2 of the multifamily EV charging project and high-perform heat pump incentive program coordination expansion, EV purchase, public transit voucher assistance for tenants. Other things could be brought into that as the outreach to this specific area is done. It seems like since there is going to be pretty robust outreach and a lot of studying, we can piggyback on that. Some of the other things that would have been a separate project. And I think, you know, make like a mini eco block for Albany. That's my suggestion.
Go ahead, Lucinda.
Yes, bring back the climate emergency declaration, which I'm assuming is going to happen. Hopefully will happen next month. Second, there's been discussion in the past about the disposable foodware ordinance modeled on the Alameda County model ordinance that Zero Waste has put out. And we would like more, some kind of public outreach on the gas pruning project. That's it. Thank you.
All right, let's go ahead and adjourn. Our next meeting will be January
17th.
17th. Thank you.